Welcome to Dialogue, a true crime conversation. I am your host, Rebecca Sebastian, and we're in a little summer series here. So what you're going to hear next is an interview with David Rudolf and Sonya Pfeiffer. You may remember they were on Dialogue way back in the fall of 2020 to discuss their podcast, Abuse of Power. Well, I just spoke with them in June, right after Derek Chauvin's sentencing, which feels like forever ago, just a few weeks, which is crazy. And that episode was released on my Patreon for my companion show called TRIALOGUE, which I am releasing to you today to enjoy. As always, it's an honor and a thrill to have David and Sonya on. I call them the true crime criminal justice power couple because they are. And if you recall, Derek Chauvin was convicted in the death of George Floyd, and he was sentenced to 22.5 years. This conversation with David and Sonya happened a day after the sentencing, so their perspective was fresh, as was mine, and even now, just a few weeks later, really good reminder of the trial and everything that George Floyd's death sparked in our country. With that, here's David Rudolf and Sonya Pfeiffer.
I want to give my condolences to the Floyd family. There's going to be some other information in the future that would be of interest, and I hope things will give you some peace of mind. Thank you.
Hey diehards, welcome to TRIALOGUE, a courtroom conversation. I'm delighted and honored that I got to spend a little bit of time with David Rudolf and Sonya Pfeiffer. They are married attorneys, co-hosts of Abuse of Power podcast, but they met during both of their work on the Michael Peterson case. Sonya was a journalist covering the story. David, of course, was Michael Peterson's criminal defense attorney. They are past guests of Dialogue. If you have not heard them on Dialogue, go back. They kicked off season 2 way back in, it was probably September or October. Season 2, episode 1, Sonya Pfeiffer, David Rudolf. Go back and listen if you haven't. And again, they are the hosts of Abuse of Power, an amazing podcast focused entirely on wrongful convictions. Their season 2 will be coming back later this year. You will hear a little taste of what they're working on. They're working on one story for this season. But today we're talking about Derek Chauvin's sentence, and they are honestly just perfect people to talk about this with. Both attorneys, they have so many vantage points from within the legal system, and they don't hold back. We get into Black Lives Matter, law enforcement, police reform, defunding the police. It all happens. So tune in, listen, and hear what they think, and be sure to check out their podcast, Abuse of Power. Thank you so much to David and Sonya for sharing your insight and your candor around this subject. Okay, good morning, Sonya and David. Thank you so much for coming back to Dialogue. This is actually our bonus episode called TRIALOGUE, and I couldn't think of better people to discuss Derek Chauvin's sentencing with. So good morning, and thanks for being here.
Good morning. We're happy to be here again.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, and on a Saturday, no less. True heroes here. So let's get right into this. This just happened yesterday, and if it was a normal Friday for me, I would have spent the whole day streaming court TV, but my daughter graduated high school, so I had to kind of be present for that.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. Very, very wonderful day. But as soon as I was able, I watched and read recaps. So pretty much out the gate, we learn there will not be a new trial. Judge Cahill says that's not going to happen. And then he states that his job is to apply the law to specific facts of the case, not to be ruled by emotion, public opinion. And I don't know how closely you followed the trial, but I've loved the way he presided over this case the whole time. I liked his demeanor. I loved how he treated jurors. And then he talks about the sentence. So just a quick recap, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but 12 years was kind of the base lowest he could get. 40 years would have been the maximum he could receive. The state was suggesting 30 years, and the defense was asking for parole.
Probation.
Probation. I'm sorry. Probation. Yes, of course. So that seemed like a big chasm between the two. So then let's talk about what Judge Cahill did rule.
So I think that you did state it correctly. I mean, there's what's called a presumptive sentence. And so, I mean, I think as most people know, Derek Chauvin wasn't convicted of first-degree murder. So
Right.
that already put him in a category where we were just looking at this presumptive sentence of, I think it was 12 to 15 years. 12 years. And part of that is not just the crime he was convicted of, but also the fact that he didn't have any sentencing points before him. He didn't have a criminal history. So in other words, he was coming to this sentencing hearing with no criminal background. So that puts him in a category of a fairly low exposure to incarceration, even though we're talking about a murder. And I think, what Judge Cahill did was incredibly thoughtful. First of all, when he began by acknowledging the pain of the Floyd family, that was important. And he did not do so with a sense of sappiness, or he was trying to get attention for it, or come across as having a particular level of gravitas in the judge, being a judge. It really, truly, in my opinion, was a man acknowledging that this is the most important thing today. And let's not forget that as I move forward. When he went through his sentencing, he did what he had to do, which is apply the facts of the case to the law as it exists. And you're right about that chasm. And I think probably any criminal defense lawyer is going to do their best to try to get the lowest sentence possible for their client. I do think that was pretty brazen to ask for probation and time served. But in terms of what the state was asking for, I don't think that was unreasonable, particularly because at trial, the judge had found 4 out of 5 aggravating factors. What the judge needed to do was look at that presumptive sentence of 12 years and then say, I can either go lower or higher, but if I do so, I have to explain why. The first thing I need to do, if I'm going to go higher, is find an aggravating factor. He already found 4 at trial. So he said that step is met. The next thing I have to do is look at those aggravating factors and decide whether any or all of them make this rise to a level where I should go above that presumptive level. It makes this particularly egregious. And that's what he did with 2 of the factors.
Exactly. With abuse of power, interestingly enough.
That's why you're here.
and with extreme cruelty. The fact is really cruel. And so those are the 2 factors that he zeroed in on. And as Sonya said, it was brazen for the defense to ask for probation and time served. But sometimes what you do is, that the prosecution is asking for 30 years. And so you want to let the judge sort of split the baby. And so you ask for something that is not going to happen.
Sure.
But which, maybe moves the needle downward a little bit for the judge. Because he can say, no, I'm not going to do that. But I will, go down from 30 to 22 and a half. So that may have been what he was thinking about.
That makes sense. And we do land on this 22 and a half years. But one thing I wanted to ask you about that I didn't quite understand, that I'm wondering if other people are confused by, that the judge said, counts 2 and 3 are unadjudicated as lesser offenses of count 1. Now that's very specific. Can you, so the burden was met through the first count, so you don't need to add additional sentencing to that?
It's basically what's called a lesser included offense.
Okay.
Those things that he was convicted of, the elements of those crimes are contained within the major crime, within the, so in other words, you can't be, in the same way that you can't go to trial twice for the same thing, you can't be punished twice for the same thing.
Right. Got it. Okay.
That makes
so
sense?
That does make sense. That's helpful.
So the 22 and a half years basically covered all 3 of the offenses.
Okay. So am I hearing that you feel this was a just and fair sentence? Are you pleased? I mean, it's so hard to use that word in the context of what we're talking about, but how do you feel about the sentence personally?
Look, like I think so many people have reflected, there's a difference between justice and accountability. And I think what the judge did is what the judge could do to establish accountability here. I mean, look, justice is that we're not here talking to you about it today, right? I mean, justice is that our Black and brown brothers and sisters on the street are no longer worried about their behavior when they walk by somebody in uniform.
Yeah.
That's justice. In terms of the sentence, for me, I really just reflected on how the judge handled it. As somebody who's been in front of a judge, standing next to a person who is about to have a sentence imposed, it was important to me how the judge handled this. Rarely do criminal defendants get much deference from a judge. And sometimes if there's any cynicism, it's directed towards the defendant. I thought the judge did a brilliant job in being as neutral as possible, but yet, like I said earlier, really hitting home that not only was this a meaningful case for the Floyd family, but for people across the country and across the world. He recognized that and he acknowledged their pain. But in terms of justice, look, this is one step in the right direction. And let's see what happens with the other officers. Let's see what happens in the other cases that are out there. Let's see what happens the next time we're in a similar situation. David, what do you think?
Well, I think it's a baby step, really. It's such a small piece of such a large problem that justice. No, I don't think. As I think the family said, justice would be that George was still alive.
Of course.
And that can't be reached. In some ways, I think people are already beginning to slide back from the recognition that they seem to have after the whole incident occurred. And so that's a little bit discouraging to me. I don't know how you feel about that, Sonya, but it just feels like, there's already some pushback against, the whole notion that the police need to be held more accountable.
Yeah, the sense of urgency is maybe diminishing, and the reality that we have to change things and how messy that's going to be and how slow and difficult. Is a resistance to police reform and defunding the police, do you think? Is that the reality?
Of what people are pushing back against, or is that the reality?
Yeah, the resistance, the slipping back, the going backwards that David was talking about.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. You see that happening. And there's lots of reasons for it. One, like you said, is it's going to be really hard. This system is so ingrained and in so many facets of society. We're talking about the criminal legal system, but it goes far beyond that because this is something that's just really in the consciousness of everyone. Lately I have been proselytizing about this book, Cast, which I don't know if you've read or not, but you absolutely should, because
it's on the list.
It's amazing. It really makes everything fit together in a way that helps you understand why things are so fundamentally screwed up. But yeah, there is a slipping back. And a large part of that is because it's difficult to make change and to really dismantle these systems and rebuild. But there's also a sense of comfort in what you know and what you're used to. And what happened to George Floyd created enormous discomfort, particularly for white people, particularly for people in positions of authority. And to go back to, well, let's just get back to what we used to do. That feels more comfortable. It's not the right thing to do, but it's the easy thing to do. And I think it's fair to say that this country has a great history of doing the easy thing and not the hard thing.
Yes, I that makes a lot of sense. Derek Chauvin, we mentioned, doesn't have a criminal record, but he did have a lot of infractions within his job and his work. So what can we focus on there in the world of law enforcement and their records and conduct within their jobs to prevent some of this from happening, maybe as one of the pieces of this complicated puzzle?
Well, yeah, there's a couple of things, I think. And we were talking yesterday with Clive Stafford Smith. I have trouble with his name for some reason.
Called him Clyde like 3 times yesterday.
They're both cool names. I mean,
yeah. Anyway, he's a great human rights lawyer from England who also is admitted to practice in the United States. And he was making the point that we need to focus on who gets recruited to be police officers. That you ought to do some psychological screening right at the jump to make sure that you're not hiring people who are authoritarian to begin with.
Yeah.
he made that point. I think it's a valid point. My point was that we need to do much more training of the people we do hire in terms of confirmation bias, in terms of inherent bias. We really need to sensitize the police to what we all suffer from in our lives, which is confirmation bias. It's not a police thing. It's a human thing.
Right. And that's really helpful to point out. I think that can take the defenses down a little, hopefully, in the conversation that we all have it. But given their position of authority and what they're called to do and serve, it can have very disastrous results.
Absolutely. And so those are two things. And then, there's things such as the wording that people use, and maybe this is part of what you were getting at. I think it's unfortunate to talk about defunding the police.
Agreed.
No one wants to defund the police and not have any police around. I think what we're really talking about is reallocating the resources that the police have so that you have more training and more sensitivity to situations that are likely to arise, and more resources to deal with those. It's not defunding, it's changing the priorities so that perhaps you have social service people who are part of the police department who can respond. When somebody is threatening suicide or out in the street with a hood over their head, and you don't have to shoot them, you can try to de-escalate. So I think that was unfortunate. And I think in some ways the slogan Black Lives Matter, while I understand it and I understand where it comes from, it's true that all lives matter, and it might have been better for them to have adopted that slogan.
No, I disagree with you entirely.
Okay. Well, hold on.
Love this.
Let me just finish my point before you knock it down. If the slogan was all lives matter, including Black lives, maybe that would have more traction with the people who you really want to influence, which is the white population. And you don't, because now the natural pushback from them is, all lives matter, or blue lives matter, or red lives matter.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my point. But go ahead and tell me why I'm wrong.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying I disagree. I think, okay, I'll give you this. Maybe Black Lives Matter too, right? Like, I think that's what you're trying to say.
Okay, yes.
Okay. But
great. I like
Problem solved.
But I also want to point out that when you do that, in some ways, it's taken away from the power of that simple statement, Black Lives Matter. Okay, Black Lives Matter too. Well, fine, but you are taking away from the fact that Black lives do not matter in this country, and they're only starting to. And so I actually feel, I understand what you're saying. I understand why lots of people say, again, part of it is discomfort. It feels really uncomfortable to be like, Black Lives Matter. Well, but all lives matter, don't they? Like, that's so, clutch your pearls. This is like, Black Lives Matter.
Period. End of story. Yeah.
That's where I am on it. But I mean, I understand where you're coming from.
I get it. I'm trying to be a little bit pragmatic in terms of
pragmatism does not work here anymore is the problem, right? I mean, that's the reality.
You're more radical about this than I am. Jeez.
This is amazing. I'm just like popcorn. I'm like, no, but this gets into white fragility, which is, I think, actually what you're talking about, which isn't unrelated. It's like the minute white people got uncomfortable with the idea that this was happening before our very eyes, or in some places a little more hidden, this just busted it wide open last year.
Right.
And we were very uncomfortable with it.
Yes.
So I understand the tension. And to your earlier point, to echo that, Sonya, Ben Crump, the Floyd family attorney, said this is a step towards accountability. You both said this, not justice. But he even said, this is good. Police officers are going to be accountable for for murdering anybody, Black, white, or brown. And I think coming from him, that was maybe really important and powerful for people to hear. But I have to ask you about Chauvin's one and only statement. We barely heard from him through the trial. Then he says this crazy, cryptic. I mean, I'm gonna wait to say what I think, but I'm gonna just quote what he said, which was short. My condolences to the Floyd family. There's gonna be some other information in the future that is gonna be of interest, and I hope things will give you some peace of mind. Thank you. What the hell did that mean?
I have no idea. I read that and I was like, what?
Why did his lawyer let him do that? There's no new trial. Of course they'll appeal, right? There's going to be an appeal, but can they?
Well, you have a couple of different routes. You have your direct appeal. He has that route first. If the direct appeal is, taken all the way up and denied, then you have federal routes if they're, certain. So he has some appeals out there. But I could not make heads or tail of that statement. I don't get it. There are some things that might make you feel better. Well, what could that be? Do you have any thoughts about that, David?
I have no idea.
I thought it was in such poor taste to offer condolences, say there's new information, and then say it's going to be of interest to you and it might give you peace of mind, like as if he has any kind of peace to offer this family. I thought it was so bizarre. It was almost like a stay tuned kind of message, which I thought was gross.
Yeah. Maybe I'm just going to throw this out there and I'm not being callous. Maybe he is going to write some sort of note and he's planning on killing himself. I don't know.
Oh my God.
Maybe.
That didn't even occur to me, but I've
Go ahead.
No, please.
I have to say that just offering them condolences struck me as bizarre and completely inappropriate. You offer condolences when there's an accident.
Mm-hmm.
You don't. The person who keeps their knee on somebody's neck for 9.5 minutes and kills them, you don't offer condolences to their family. Maybe you offer an apology.
Right.
Yes.
Maybe you say, I am really, really sorry that I did this. Maybe. But condolences, that just tells me he's completely out of touch with reality.
Completely.
Well, I think the fact is, we heard from his mom and, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, where all she said is, my son's not a racist. I'm sorry. What you needed to say is, I'm sorry to the Floyd family. I'm a mom. I get that you want to protect your child. I understand that. But George Floyd has a mom, right? Like that was also entirely inappropriate, but hence her son.
Yeah. Oh, it was chilling. And now I'm thinking of all these other scenarios. I've definitely thought he could take his life if he gets convicted, but I didn't think that maybe that's what he was alluding to in the note. It'll be really interesting. I have no idea. I thought there was going to be some new information that they're going to, like for the civil case maybe, and I don't know what it could be. The whole thing, I thought, how did his lawyer let him say this? Did he know? Like, it just seemed like really bad advice, and I don't know.
Well, maybe not. I mean, look, there's some things you can't control. I mean, sure. I remember one federal sentencing I had with a client who was on her way to probation, and she had drafted ahead of time what she was going to say. We looked over it. You do try to control these things. She pulled out something from her pocket and she started reading it to the judge, and I felt the blood draining out of my face. I mean, she went from probably what was going to be a probationary sentence to, I think, 7 years. And there are some things you can control and some things you can't, and you do your best to control the things that you have some ability to control, but otherwise that's kind of out of your hands. So I don't know if his lawyer suggested he say that or say anything at all. I probably would have told my client to say nothing if my client was Derek Chauvin.
Absolutely.
Yeah, did not help. And his disconnect this whole time has been really remarkable, but I guess not surprising. Well, this was really good to break down with you guys. And Abuse of Power is coming back, season 2. You just started recording. Can you tell us maybe give us a taste of what cases you're covering, how it's going to be the same or different? What would you like to share?
Yeah, so it is going to be a little different because, as you know, in season 1, we covered one case per episode.
Yes.
Audible has purchased our podcast, and Campfire is still our producers. Yeah, they're fantastic. And our whole team has taken a different approach this time, which is to tell one story over the course of several episodes. And we are shocked that this is a story that nobody really knows in this country. It is a British citizen who's been on death row in Florida, does have a life sentence now, but he's been there for going on 35 years. Clearly a double homicide he did not commit at the DuPont Plaza in downtown Miami in 1986, which is clearly a cartel hit, right? Like, anyway, it is extraordinary in terms of narrative, and it is extraordinary in terms of the system being so concerned with the veil of fairness and procedures we should all have while not giving a hoot about the merits of a case. I think that's probably the best forecasting I could give.
I think that's right. And I like the fact that you raised your eyebrows when Sonya said it was a cartel hit, because the important thing is the abuse of power that is sort of revealed through this case. But the other nice thing is I think people are going to really want to listen because it's an amazingly compelling story.
Well, that never hurts, right? If we can be entertained while we learn, this infotainment genre is so important because this is, I think, how a lot of people awaken to some of these issues.
Exactly.
So grab them with a great story. This has all the good ingredients. I'll tell you that. I can hear it. That's very exciting. Forgive my ignorance. I have to ask, how does a British citizen can you get charged in? Yeah, Amanda Knox.
The crime was in Florida, so he was a British citizen, but he was living in Florida at the time.
Okay.
And you do get some, like when you are a foreign citizen, there are certain things that you have access to. In fact, that's one of the things we're probably going to talk about is that when he was arrested and charged, he was supposed to have been given notice about the fact that he could contact the British consulate in Miami, but he wasn't given that notice. And it took some time until the British government actually got involved and knew what was happening with him.
Wow.
But yeah, that's one small little layer of the onion we're going to peel back.
Oh my gosh. So when does it drop? When does it start coming out?
I think we are aiming for the end of this year. So we have, we really just got into the studio this week and we knocked it out of the park all week, day after day with our interviews. And then we have some more work to do with our producers in terms of putting the story together. And David and I, as you know, do some conversation. And so we reflect a little bit on what we talked with our interviewees about. So I think the goal is end of this year, but I promise you I'll keep you posted.
Oh, please do. And I adore you both. I love what you do. Thank you so much for doing this today. And I appreciate you keeping this conversation going with me.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thanks for all that you do. Congrats on all the good stuff happening with your show. And it's good to see you again.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Sure. Bye.
Bye.
You are listening to Trialogue, a courtroom conversation, a Patreon-only companion to Dialogue, a true crime conversation. Both podcasts are hosted and edited by me, Rebecca Sebastian, audio engineered by Jason Esri. You can follow me at Dialogue Pod on all social media platforms. Learn more and sign up for my newsletter at RebeccaSebastian.com. Thank you for listening.